This video is brought to you by Sailrite. Visit Sailrite.com for all your project supplies, tools, and instructions. Got an outdoor chaise lounge chair with outdoor cushions? Keep it looking brand new year after year by making an outdoor furniture cover from a great outdoor fabric from Sailrite. Our cover fabrics will outlast any of the mass-produced cookie-cutter covers on the market. Protect your investment by making a custom-fit cover with help from Sailrite. The amount of fabric required to make a cover is typically the same for most chaise lounge chairs, about 6 yards. But let's take some measurements of your chair to confirm that. First, you need to know the top panel's length and width. The length is measured from the floor over the back of the chair to the floor behind the chair. Be sure to include the path of the armrests in that measurement. For the width measurement, measure the widest part. Be sure to include at least 3 inches extra to the length and width measurements for seams and hems. The side panel is mirrored, so we only need to measure one side. Measure the distance from the front of the chair to the rear, where the top portion of the chair would stop, along the floor for the length measurement. Then we need a front and rear height measurement. To those measurements, add 3 inches for seams and hems. Some fabrics only have one right side. In other words, only one side can be facing out, but others, either side can be used. Here we are showing the best way to nest the fabric for a fabric that has only one right side. And here we're showing how to nest the panels for a fabric which does not have a right or wrong side. In other words, both sides can be used as the outside. You will notice that in both nesting illustrations, we need a little under 6 yards of a 60-inch wide fabric. Typically, most outdoor lounge chairs will always require that amount of fabric, unless they are outside the norm. Now that we have that all cleared up, let's get started and show you how to do the patterning. We will start with the side panel. We have turned the chair on its side to trace the shape on the fabric. It is the easiest and quickest way to trace the shape of the chair. You can take measurements and transfer them to the fabric, but it will take about twice as long as doing it this way. Notice that we also secured the backrest adjuster to its maximum height, or where the chair is typically left when it is in use. Cindy's going to explain what she's doing.
We have the chair laid on the fabric sideways so we can cut the side panel. This eliminates measuring. We have quite a few different angles on this chair, so we're going to try and just draw a pattern of it with the chair on the fabric. And I'm going to lay my straight edge 2 inches out from the edge of the chair all the way around as I do this and draw my lines. Down here we have the feet of the chair almost at the edge of the fabric. We don't want this to rub on the ground, so we're going to just cut it at that point. And then when we get all the pieces put together, we're going to turn up a casing or a sleeve down here at the bottom for the shock cord to keep it up off the ground and to keep it snug around the feet of the chair. Okay, I have this ruler laid at about 2 inches. So I have 2 inches up to this point all the way across there. And I'm going to continue that up closer to the arm. And then draw around about 2 inches away from the arm, around the curve. And from that curve, I'm going to go up to here. And again, be about 2 inches away. Ruler laid at the curve here and 2 inches out up here.
For this cover, we're using SurLast fabric. Another great cover fabric that works great for outdoor furniture is Top-Notch 9. Both brands work well for outdoor furniture cover fabrics, as they are breathable, water-resistant, abrasion-resistant, and UV-resistant. Which one should you pick? We'll discuss that in a few seconds.
The next piece I'm going to measure is the piece that's going to go all the way up the back, down the front, and then down the front to the floor again. And I want to use the widest point to get that measurement. So from the outside edge of the wheel to the outside edge of the wheel is about 26.5. So I'm going to add 2 inches to that and make it 28.5 wide. But a big long rectangle.
To make this cover, we're using SurLast fabric. At the time of the shooting, we did not stock Top-Notch 9 fabric. Let's discuss some of the differences of the two brands of fabrics. Top-Notch 9 is slightly heavier than SurLast fabric. That may be a plus or a negative to some, as lighter fabrics are easier to use and store. However, the top-notch 9, which is heavier, is stronger and lasts longer. It is warranted for 8 years, while SurLast is warranted for 3.
I'm going to put a pin at the bottom on the right side of the fabric so I remember which is the right and which is the wrong, and make sure that I get opposite pieces for this. So to get the length of this piece that's going to go in the middle, I'm just going to measure all the way around this edge.
By measuring with this flexible tape around the perimeter of one of the side panels, we will know exactly what length the top panel needs to be. After she's done with this, she needs to make yet one more side panel, and we can use this side panel as a template for the second. If you have questions regarding what brand of fabric to use for your outdoor furniture, give us a call at Sailrite. We're glad to help.
My tape measure is 120 inches long. So I'm going to put a mark there at the end and just measure the rest of it and add the 120 and 12.
Here, the first side panel is going to be mirrored. The outside surfaces are facing each other. For easy reference, Cindy puts a pin at the bottom of this panel on the outside surface. To save on table space, Cindy folds the fabric in half to make the top panel, which has a length of 132 inches.
Okay, to cut the panel that goes in the center, it needs to be 132 inches long, so I'm folding this in half at 66. So it is 2 layers, 66 inches long down there to the end, and it's 28 inches wide.
These measurements for the top panel are obviously for our Chaise lounge chair. Yours may be different. To cut the SurLast fabric, Cindy's using shears. However, using a hot knife will help to seal the edges of the fabric and keep them from unraveling. It is your choice. Both the side panels and the top panel are now cut out, and we're ready to start sewing them together.
So here we have the side panel that we cut to the shape of the chair, and this is our big long piece that we just cut, the 132 inches long. So I want to put these two right sides together with this narrow part. The long part is going to follow the shape that we cut. The narrow part, this is going to become the front of your lounge chair. So I'm going to match up the edges, put a couple pins until I get up to this top edge, and then I'm going to clip it so it will go around the corner. About a 1/2 inch in.
Our seam allowance will be about a 1/2 inch. It's always wise to cut a little bit less than a 1/2 inch so that your slit does not go into the area where you'll be sewing. I know Cindy said something different there, but it should be less than a 1/2 inch.
And at this curve, I'm going to put a couple clips in the curve.
Same thing here, less than a 1/2 inch in. Several slits are required because of the curve here.
So that it technically straightens out. And at this curve, which is the other direction, the cuts are going to go in the straight piece so that it will go around the curve.
She'll continue this process all around the perimeter until she reaches the other corner. We've skipped ahead here to another 90-degree turn, and only one slit is required there. Wow, now that's some good measuring. These two panels came out perfectly. They're exactly on top of each other. That may not happen for you, and if it does not happen, don't worry about it.
When you get down to the end here, this actually came out perfect, which is really nice, but if it doesn't, you can always trim it off after you've sewn it together.
Next, we'll take this over to the sewing machine and sew a straight stitch about a 1/2 inch away from the matched up raw edges of the fabric. Be sure to do some reversing at the beginning. You can either pull the pins or leave them in and sew over them if you have a heavy-duty sewing machine like the Sailrite Ultrafeed LS1. This stitch will be a semi-flat felled seam, which means we'll sew a 1/2 inch from the raw edge, then splay the fabric apart and sew a top stitch. We'll show you that after we sew around the entire perimeter. Let's show you what to do when you reach a corner. When you reach the corner, bury the needle in the fabric assembly. Lift the presser foot, rotate the fabric assembly, and then lower the presser foot and continue to sew. We follow that same procedure for any type of curve when the sewing machine wants to go straight and we need it to take a slightly different turn. We did the same thing here, even though this is not a 90-degree turn.
Before I go any farther, I'm going to see how this fits on the chair. And remember, we're going to leave the pillow on the back side so it doesn't catch too much water if it should rain.
We have yet to do a top stitch, but we're first going to check the fit before we finish the top stitch, and it looks good.
I'm going to do a semi-flat felled seam all the way along the seam that I just did, which involves pushing both layers to the centerpiece and doing a top stitch out here just a little bit away from my first stitching. I'll use the edge of the foot for a guide for that.
The reason that we're pushing the seam towards the top panel is that it creates kind of like a shingle effect, so the water can run off the top and down the sides of the panel. We'll do that for this side panel and the opposite side panel, so our top stitch will be on the top panel, not the side panels. Now, if you happen to do it by mistake the other way, it's not a big deal, but it is better for water to run off the fabric as a shingle will do on home.
It's a little bit awkward when you get to these corners. Just pull them out as far as you can and work around the corner a stitch at a time. And make sure you're not catching anything underneath except the 2 layers of seam.
As the top stitch is created, notice that Cindy is splaying the fabric apart. She's trying to pull it apart as she sews. That way the fold is directly on the first stitch that we created that is hidden.
And this is where we put the clips to go around the curves. So this is the same idea. Just go a little bit at a time and make sure you've got only the 2 layers of stitching or 2 layers of seam underneath there, and work your way around the corner.
As she works around the corner, notice she's pulling the 2 halves of the fabric apart so that the fold is up against the first stitch.
I'm ready to attach the other outside panel to this. I'm going to put them once again right sides together with the big long edge following the angles of my piece.
We will not show this whole process since it's done exactly the same way that we did the opposite side panel. We will pin it in place and then sew around the perimeter and then create our semi-flat felled seam. Let's move on ahead. To give your cover a better form-fitting shape, you may want to insert some darts in the cover fabric where necessary. Cindy is placing the cover on the lounge chair wrong side out so that she can determine where darts may make it look better.
I'm going to put this cover on with the wrong side out so I can check the fit and see if it needs any changes made to it. And then I can pin them in from the wrong side and sew them just along my pins. It looks like we could have a better fit across this area. Make it a little more snug. The shock cord is going to pull it in at the bottom, but there's an awful lot of fullness right here. So I'm going to pin a dart into this and then stitch it down before I put the hem in. One of the things that we want to be careful of is that we don't have any places where the water is going to pool on this and just sit. So we want this to be smooth, and hopefully the water is going to come off, and this is actually at an angle going down. So nothing's going to sit right here. And if I take these tucks in here, I think that's going to help this to stay a little more smooth and taut. So I'm just pinning a big fold into this.
The darts can be placed anywhere on your cover to give it a more form-fitting look. However, you always want to be aware that the cover should be oversized. Otherwise, it'll be difficult to insert over your furniture and you may not use it as often.
There's no rules for this. I am just folding out the fullness of this piece. And I'm going to start at the bottom when I stitch and come all the way up and just follow my pins and angle out so it ends up here before I get to my seam.
Remember, our cover is placed on the outdoor furniture so that it's wrong side out.
And then I'll go to the other side and do the same thing on the other side before I put the hem in.
We will not show installing the dart on the other side because it's done exactly the same way as we showed already. Let's move on.
So here's where I pinned. I'm going to stop stitching up in this area and I'm going to start stitching way down here at the bottom. And I'm just going to stitch right up and take my pins out as I go and follow the line of the pins.
We are not going to create any top stitch here. We're just going to sew up the darts and do some reversing at the beginning and here at the end. To reverse, Cindy does not sew over the previous stitch line. Instead, she just sews a little bit off into the dart, which still works. Now she'll do the same process on the second dart. We will not show all of this. Next up, we make the sleeve for the rope tensioning device. We're going to be using shock cord. We need to install the cover on the chair. We're installing it right side out just to make sure we like the way it looks. But before we make the hem along the bottom edge, we need to turn it wrong side out because we like the way it looks.
So here's the dart that we just put in, and it does make this side fit a whole lot better. We're ready to pin up the hem now in this where the shock cord will go. So I'm going to just use my fingers as a guide. I don't want this to drag right on the ground. I want to leave a little airspace there. So I'm going to use my fingers as a guide for how much I want to pin up on this. And I'll just go all the way around and pin it up. And it doesn't have to be a lot of pins, just a few, so that when you take it off, you have a guide to where you want the hem to be.
She'll go all around the perimeter of the cover, following this same process. Now that Cindy's happy with the way it looks and where it's hemmed along the bottom edge, she removes it from the chair.
Okay, I still have my hem folded up where I pinned it as it was on the chair, but I do want to make an area at the front, right here at the front of the chair at the bottom where the shock cord is, so that you can adjust it if you need to. So I'm going to find the center, which is 13, and I'm going to measure out 3 inches from each side of the center. And then I'm going to make a rough mark about 1/2 inch up from where my fold is. And I'm going to have to take out a few pins, so I'm going to put a pin here and a pin here like that to give me a guide of where I need to fold that back up after I do this little facing piece. I'm going to trim that little rectangle out. And use a scrap piece of my fabric, right sides together, on that rectangle. And when I take it over to the sewing machine, I'm going to sew around my rectangle at 1/2 inch on 3 sides. Now I want to cut out this little piece also, along the same lines that my first rectangle was cut. And I'm going to cut into the corners so that I can turn it around, wrong sides together. Now I'm going to go back to the machine and stitch this down just so it stays in place.
She buries her needle at the corner, lifts the presser foot, rolls the assembly around, lowers the presser foot, then continues to sew. Great way to make a 90-degree turn.
I'm going to stitch around it again approximately 1 inch out from my first stitching, and then I can trim all of this extra off.
When cutting here, only cut that patch that was added. Do not cut into your cover fabric underneath. You may not notice that here, but she's being careful to only cut the 1 layer of fabric.
Now when I fold up the hem, this is going to end up right at the bottom, which is going to make a nice strong, clean finished edge for the shot cord to come out right here.
Next up, we need to create the double hem and insert our shot cord.
I'm moving some of my pins to the bottom edge of this fold so I can open this up and put the shot cord in so it's in there already as I sew it. Then I don't have to go back through and thread it through the casing. So the shot cord's down here in the bottom. And then I'm going to fold so I have an even edge around the top. I'm going to fold down 2. So this is 2 1/4. And put some pins up here. And then when I stitch, I'm going to stitch across at the top of this.
Cindy's also going to pin the end of the shot cord here at the opening so that it doesn't automatically creep back.
I'm putting a pin in that so that I don't accidentally pull it through as I'm working on it.
We're not going to show all of this, but here it is, complete. We haven't sewn it yet. We just are finishing up the last portion.
Okay, I have the shot cord all the way through and it's pinned all the way around. I'm going to cut this off and take it over to the machine and sew at this edge all the way around.
You need to do some reversing at the beginning and the end of your stitching to lock the stitch in place. Then you'll sew all the way around the perimeter, securing the sleeve in place. You can sew over the pins or remove the pins as you approach them, as Cindy is doing here. In an attempt to keep the shock cord from accidentally slipping into the sleeve, we'll sew the sleeve opening a little bit smaller.
Now before we go over and fit it onto the chair, I'm going to do a short row of stitching right here closer to the cord. And then when we pull it taut and get it to the length that we want it, we'll put a knot in the end of the cord. And this stitching closer to the cord will keep the cord from pulling back through. And I'm going to do that on both sides.
Our cover's done. Now all we need to do is fit it on the chair and adjust our shock cord along the bottom edge.
I'm going to put a knot in one side of this so I don't pull it out as I'm working on it. And then I'm going to just start tugging on this end of it.
We want the shock cord along the bottom edge to be fairly taut so that the cover stays on in any windstorms, but we don't want it so tight that it's difficult to install or remove the cover.
Okay, I've this pulled up pretty tight around the bottom of the chair, and I've pulled quite a bit out. So I'm going to put this clamp on it so that I can knot it.
Now, our outdoor furniture cover for a Chaise lounge chair is complete and ready to be put to use. Protect your outdoor investment with a great cover that you can make yourself from supplies at Sailrite. Here's the materials list and the tools that we use to make this outdoor furniture cover for a Chaise lounge chair. Outdoor living spaces are becoming more and more popular each year. For maximum comfort and a pleasing look, seating often is done using foam cushions covered in outdoor fabrics. Even though those cushions are made from fabrics that are made for outdoor applications, the sun, rain, and dirt can still affect the overall look, but also the life of the seating. So it's important to protect your outdoor furniture with a furniture cover made from fabrics at Sailrite. If you have questions about the fabrics that Sailrite offers, give us a call. We're glad to help.